Cool. Um, Before I jump into it, though, I did want to do an acknowledgement that this presentation, the land we're on now, the birding that I did was in Maidu homelands, and there are names for the places that I did the birding in, names for the birds, names for the other wildlife in the Maidu language, which I'm trying to learn, but I don't know it good enough now to use Maidu during this presentation. But I wanted to acknowledge this big year occurred on Maidu homeland, and acknowledge that. So, so this is part two. I don't know if I can, well, I wanted to thank a few people, and I don't know if they're on. I can't see all who are on, but before I jumped in, I wanted to thank Plumas Audubon for hosting this presentation, first of all. I really appreciate the venue, and I'm excited. A lot of people have actually watched part one on YouTube, which is always kind of weird, you know, that when you have material out there, who's watching it and such, but I'm delighted by that. I wanted to thank some people that were really involved with the big year. There's many people I could thank, starting with my family. Good to see you here, Emma, Andrew, and Julia, for putting up with me during the year of 2022. But I wanted to thank a few people in particular that played a big role in the big year from more of the birding perspective. Colin Dillingham was my main wingman and mentor and reviewer. He's actually the eBird reviewer for Plumas County, along with a guy named Liam Huber from Butte County. So he ensures that the records are valid observations of the species that are purported to be seen. And also Colin, he's been a great mentor as well, and taught me a lot about birding. And he is the dean of Plumas County birding with a life list of 294 species. There's been, at least on eBird, 327 species of birds have been identified in Plumas County. So Colin has seen a good portion of those birds. Also wanted to thank Scott and Amber. I don't know if you're out there, Scott and Amber, but Scott and Amber had the big year record up until last year of 251 species. Oh, cool. You can see, I can see myself on it. It's working. And they were very generous. There's like the movie, The Big Year. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's very competitive and people are secretive, and they sort of, they try to trick and compromise each other's ability to find birds and stuff. But the opposite was true in this case. They actually were very supportive, and actually found me some species, especially hummingbirds at their house. They live on Chandler Road, near the intersection of Quincy Junction Road and Chandler Road, and have an amazing array of feeders, and including hummingbird feeders. So, and they're actually really open to people coming and visiting. If you take Quincy Junction Road out to Chandler Road, take a right, you pass, there's a house right on the corner, a gray house, and then there's a big barn with like search and rescue vehicles like packed inside of it, and a house right next to that barn. And it's the house right after that. So it's the third house on the left after you turn right on Chandler Road off of Quincy Junction Road. I want to thank my buddy Dave Griffin for helping me reconnect to my passion for bird watching via a trip I took to Arizona at the end of 2021 that really helped me reconnect to my love for birds. I wanted to thank Liam Huber, who's he's a really young birder. He's like 25, but he's a really amazing birder for his age, and he's another one of the reviewers for Plumas County, and I've learned a lot from him, especially about how you can make contributions via eBird to knowledge of local birds. He's in Butte County, and he broke the Butte County Big Year record last year, and he writes a lot of notes with his observations about where he was at, the habitat the birds were in, the timing of the observation, like if it was the earliest time ever that a certain gull species. He covers like Gray Lodge Wildlife Refuge and places like the Thermalito After Bay, parts of Lake Oroville, stuff like that, and right up into the Feather River watershed in Butte County. And man, watching reading his eBird records is almost like reading a online encyclopedia about the birds of Butte County. So really learned a lot from him. And he was someone I'd look to with photos and observations to see if I was on track. And sometimes if I wasn't on track, he'd give me some feedback, but he did it kindly, which I really appreciate. Ryan Burnett, who is the Sierra Nevada director of Point Blue, was a really big help to me, even though he unfortunately moved out of the region last year. He's been such an amazing scientist in Plumas County in the Feather River watershed for a long time. But from afar, he really helped guide me around with notes and maps and things, the Almanor Basin, which I didn't know that well before this year. And then lastly, two people are here in the audience with us, Ryan and Rachel Bauer. I didn't really think about it till I was working on this presentation last night, but you found me the first rare bird of the year, the brambling, and the last rare bird of the year, the long-tailed duck. So thank you. I will always be grateful for that. Rachel found the brambling and Ryan found the duck. Oh, he did? Okay, well, I got to give the man credit. All right. He's got amazing rare bird radar, I call him. So let's get into some birds here. So what I'm gonna recap a little bit because I can even see from the online crowd and some of you here that not all of you saw the first presentation. I don't know who may have watched it on Zoom and YouTube, but it begs a question: what is a big year? A lot of birders just throw around that terminology like, I'm doing a big year, I'm big year, and most people don't know what it means. Oh. I got to admit someone that's in the waiting room here. Let's see. So it's kind of funny with the way I'm going to adjust something so I can see my screen a little better. So a big year, I'm going to read, here's a personal challenge or an informal competition among birders who attempt to identify as many species as possible by sight or sound. You can just do it by sound only, within a single calendar year and within a specific geographic area. And like the Audubon Christmas bird count, the idea evolved from Frank Chapman's proposal in 1900 to count birds instead of shoot them on Christmas, which I think was a evolution, certainly. And I'm glad they're not doing that anymore. I'm sure they are in some parts of the country. So the most common geographic scales of big years are global, continental, countrywide. The ones in the US are especially prevalent, and then states and provinces. Local ones are becoming increasingly common. I've even read lately, and I see Ryan riding your bike a lot, actually. Continental country big years, global big years, they're very intensive from a carbon emissions perspective, intensive on the environment, just in terms of, the amount of gas you're burning, the amount of carbon you're emitting and stuff. So increasingly local big years, like I didn't have a full electric car, but I used my hybrid and I did hike a lot. I did a lot of local birding, tried to minimize the impact. But big years are becoming really popular for people that don't emit any carbon, like carbon neutral big years, where they're just riding bikes, they're just doing a big year within the distance they can ride their bikes. So it's like a carbon neutral big year. And I think it's a good trend, because even though it's really interesting, the thought of, jetting all over the continent, jetting all over the world to count birds, it's very, very privileged for one thing and very, very intense in carbon emissions. Can you emit people, Liz, or only me?
And I gave you access to share screen.
Okay.
Took away my photo.
Cool. I'm cool. I was forgetting, but now I'm doing it. So for a crash course in what a big year is, watch this movie, The Big Year. You should watch it with Julia Drew to give her some insight into my madness. But it's just quite a good and funny movie with some good comedians about what a big year is. And they're doing it at the scale of North America, and highly competitive, but there's lots of they learn lots about themselves in the process, and it's an entertaining movie. And birders tend to love it because it has a lot of like birder specific jargon and nomenclature and stuff. Let's see, oh, good. Sorry, I'm manning the meeting too here. So in terms of my own interest in birds, a lot of it started growing up in Plumas County. I was born in Portola and was lucky to have parents who, some of this I'm repeating from the first one, but I wanted to give background for other people watching. Lucky to have parents as my mom on the left, and we're out in Sierra Valley collecting worms for fishing season. And that's Crocker Peak and Smith Peak in the background there. And I grew up doing a lot of hunting and fishing. It was one of my main doorways to understanding, connecting with the natural world was hunting and fishing. We also did a lot of camping and national park travel growing up. And here's my kids, who are a lot bigger than they are in this slide, and my dad. We're looking at some trumpeter swans in the case of the left in Montana, and a rough-legged hawk on the right in Sierra Valley. I'm getting the trumpeter swan vibe lately. So people be looking at, see how this trumpeter swan, its eye, you can't really distinguish its eye from its bill flesh very well. And it has that little lipstick on the lower mandible, has a little lipstick color on that lower mandible. So, and a very wedgy, a very long and wedgy bill relative to tundra swans, very straight on the top. So it's a good time to see tundra swans. The swans are starting to move right now and even migrating north some right now. So we have a chance of seeing some trumpeter swans. Some of this is recapping. Through a trip I took to Arizona at the end of 2021, where the first trip I'd taken on my own in 15 or 20 years of more than 3 days, I really reconnected. I won't go into the long story, but reconnected in a lot of ways with my passion for birds, and also just my priorities in life in general. And really grateful for that. Part of that was through some birding with my friend Dave Griffin, who I went to graduate school with and is shown here in this photo. And Dave also introduced me to eBird, which technologically opened up a lot of possibilities for me. As all of you, I can see here are Plumas County residents. The geography of Plumas County is a really large county. It's bigger than some states. I think it's 1.7 million acres. The watershed, Feather River watershed, which encompasses all of Plumas County, is 2.4 million acres above Lake Oroville. It's a really diverse area. As you know, it spans from the northern edge of the Sierra Nevada up into the Cascades, Great Basin on the east, and the lower foothills on the west. So it contains a lot of diverse habitats, from oak woodlands to very Great Basin-like habitats on the edge of Sierra Valley. Big wetland complexes, the biggest of which is in Sierra Valley. Amazing riparian areas like here on Indian Creek on the Hart K Ranch. The geology is quite complex too. There's a lot of granite based geology and volcanic geology, as we see here around Beckworth Peak. And then there are some big water bodies too, most of which unfortunately are reservoirs, but which definitely add diversification. Basically, Lake Alamonor is like almost like an inland sea and adds a lot of bird diversity, despite the fact it's flooded big meadows, one of the Maidu key village sites and homeland sites. It has created some good bird habitat. And then again, amazing riparian areas. One area that I became intimately familiar with this past year, because I birded there a lot, is the North Fork of the Feather River right outside of Chester. Between Chester and the lake is really amazing birding. And it's owned by a combination of the Feather River Land Trust, which owns the Olson Barn property right on the east side of Chester, which has some nice walking trails that you can access the river by. And then the rest is PG&E owns the rest all the way down to the lake. And it really is just a world-class birding area. I mean, if you were You could probably break the Plumas County Big Year if you just birded in Sierra Valley and Lake Almanor. Maybe. Well, maybe not. We'll see if that holds true as I go through the presentation. There's some birds that you have to specifically go get that are not in those two areas. But you could come close, I think, to breaking the Big Year record just birding in those two spots. There's a shot of the Sierra Valley wetlands, amazing tule habitat. I'll speed through these because I want to get to the new material. In the last presentation, I talked about the residents among us, that sort of an underrated percentage of birds in the Feather River watershed in Plumas County are year-round residents. About 85, I recounted them, depending on your definition of resident, but 85 or 90 species are in Plumas County year-round. So that constitutes an important percentage of birds that you want to find if you're doing a big year or just for birding pleasure in general. Here's a few slides of these year-round residents. Mountain chickadee on the left, northern flicker female on the right, and then Steller's jay on the left, a dark-eyed junco female on the right. I was quizzing people before, but I want to get to the new slides. Formerly known as the rufous-sided towhee on the left, now spotted towhee, and we have a lesser goldfinch male on the right. And then a lot of the owls that live in Plumas County are year-round residents, like the northern saw-whet owl on the left and the great horned owl on the right. Also covered in much more detail winter visitors. A lot of the waterfowl that are in our midst right now are just here for the winter. A lot of those species breed further north up in the tundra of the Arctic, like the tundra swans, the aptly named tundra swans, and aptly named snow geese. Tundra swans on the right, snow geese on the left. Some more cool winter visiting waterfowl, hooded mergansers on the left, and ring-necked ducks. Should be called ring-billed ducks. See if I can I zoom out? I can't zoom into there. I don't want to get into that detail yet. And then a lot of raptors also. We are visited by some really cool raptors, one of which is another Arctic tundra breeding raptor that this one on the left is a rough-legged hawk, and it breeds up in the Arctic tundra regions and to a lesser extent the prairies of northern Canada. But you'll often see it on the ground. Like it's so used to just being in the tundra that it'll take advantage of just the littlest perches, sometimes even a cow pie. It'll be like up on a cow pie, like I'm perched up here relative to the tundra. And then ferruginous hawk is another winter visitor on the right. Really beautiful. A lot of us have been really admiring this particular ferruginous hawk along Quincy Junction Road that often hangs out near Bell Lane intersection. That is an adult ferruginous hawk that is just a totally gorgeous bird. I saw it. I haven't been birding much. I'm kind of finally like weaning off my big year addiction. I did see it like last week flying around. But it seems like some of the hawks may be starting to move. Maybe the storm will like come back down. I don't know. And then quite a few water birds like loons really show up and inhabit, especially the big lakes like Lake Almanor, lakes that aren't frozen over. You know, right now, Frenchman and Davis are frozen over. Even a pretty high percentage, it's been so cold this winter, a pretty high percentage of Almanor is also frozen over. But in the non-frozen parts of the deeper lakes, you'll get these loons, like these common loons, and other species of loons, like Pacific loons. And then we also covered that there are, from a birding perspective and a big year perspective, there's some cool winter rarities. There's in winter, you know, we say there's like 85, 90 year-round residents. There's about 40 winter visitors that if you're doing a big year, you don't really want to skip any season. It's not like a huge percentage of the total birds relative to like spring migration or fall migration or the breeding season, but it's an important percentage. Like this Some of us have been birding around this January and February. We found some cool species. We haven't found this Harris's sparrow, but we have found some other. Here's a little video. I'll quiz you on this. This is like a really bad video, so don't like make fun of me. See if I can. See if you can identify the bird in the video. And this is sort of like not zoomed in. It's as if you were looking with binoculars and you're in a windstorm or something, because you'll be shaking around. My dog was like jumping up on me while I was filming this. Pause it a couple times. Look at that breast. Look at that eye line, the eyebrow above the. It's a little bit better. Let's see. See, it's got a lot of orange on its throat, above its eye, an amazing black breast band, and cool orange wing bars. You don't really see a lot of orange wing bars. Oh, I know my kids are going to want to like play this one song. It's the Twin Peaks. I don't know if you ever saw that series called Twin Peaks, but anyone see Twin Peaks? It starts with a varied thrush. So they're going to want to be playing the Twin Peaks bass right about now. Oh, look at that. Look at that forward look there. Oh, I gave it away by saying that I did. Oh, that was so lame. How many people like either had it or had an idea of what it was?
I couldn't come up with the name. I knew it was a thrush, but I knew.
Did you catch what it was, Bob?
No, your head was right in the.
Oh man, I gotta have a smaller head.
Yeah.
Maybe I gotta get down like this. Yeah.
So, yeah.
They're like
I wouldn't have gotten it anyway.
varied thrush. It's an interesting thrush that visits in the winter, and it gives you the impression of a robin. This is the male. The male has this really dark breast band. The female has a much lighter breast band, but they're plump like a robin, about the same size. They have a shorter tail, so you get the impression of a robin, but then they have all those cool markings like the orange eye line above the eye and that breast band.
Where did you see it?
It's been at my house for over 2 months. A male and a female have been hanging out, and they were last winter too. So yeah, it's just out there hanging out with a bunch of juncos, and both of them are. And anyhow, and they're pretty good. I didn't realize they were good at, like, it's almost acting like a towhee or something. They can scratch and they can throw leaves and really actively forage. So, but a real cool species. And I'm sorry I gave it away. That was really lame. But varied thrush. And they breed in the Pacific Northwest. So they're kind of a short distance migrant in the winter. They breed Oregon coast, in old growth coastal forest, Washington coast, British Columbia coast. And then they come down and inland in the winter. And we're lucky to have them here. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Cool. So a few more winter rarities. Can you see better, Bob, if I'm like at this height?
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Sorry if I'm blocking everybody. Here's another. This is a red-necked grebe, which is a pelagic grebe that will find its way to Lake Almanor. And probably, have you guys seen red-necked grebes at any other lakes besides Lake Almanor? So probably, I think they're only been recorded in Lake Almanor. You could, I would bet you could find them at Davis and Frenchman if you looked hard enough, but so much action at Almanor, that's where a lot of us head. Some really cool rare ducks that one thing I did want to say about winter from a birding perspective is just by nature of how a big year works, it starts January 1st and it ends December 31st. So you have 2 winters. you have like 2 winter times. So in some ways there's not as much pressure on you. You sort of have a second chance if you like, we've been birding quite a bit this, January, February. If you miss stuff and it takes off into the northern breeding grounds, you generally will have a second chance often come late October, November, December of the latter part of the year. Whereas in a big year, there's only one spring, only one summer, and only one, fall, early fall, especially. So you get a second, you have two chances to get these kind of cool ducks, like the Barrow's goldeneye on the left, and a Eurasian widgeon, which species that mostly nests in far eastern Russia, that comes across the northern Pacific, and some of its population winters in North America, amazingly. And we saw some in one in American Valley this year so far. Here's see if I can. These are two kinds of shrikes. Really mediocre photo. The mediocre photos in my set here are mostly by me. I see if I can zoom into this one a little bit. This one on the left, you can see it doesn't have much of a mask behind its eye, and it has a little bit of faint barring on the breast, and its bill has quite a bit of light coloration. Whereas same genus, they're both Lanius genus, and they're both like very murderous birds. They often kill prey and stick it on barbs, either barbed wire fences or spines of vegetation. So they're sometimes called the butcher bird. But this one on the left, you can see on the right is quite a bit different. It has a really dark mask that the black comes all the way over the top of the bill, and it doesn't have that barring on the chest. But anyway, we're looking at a northern shrike, which is another kind of far northern Canada, Arctic kind of a breeding shrike that comes down in the winter. And we've seen one this year. I didn't see one during the big year, and a loggerhead shrike on the right. Two really good winter birds to try to find. Sometimes you can miss both of them. And then there's also some late winter arrivals that are happening now. Always surprising to me is like Anna's hummingbirds, showing up this time of the year when it's still really cold. The sandhill cranes, the first sandhill crane that was an eBird was January 17th this year. Anyone here any earlier than that this year? Cool. And I won't go much into those late winter arrivals, but those are a couple of the cool ones. So getting into what I didn't cover, and already like really far into, it's a lot of time has passed, but timing matters so much when it comes to birding in general and big year birding. As I just mentioned, February through late March, there's some early arrivals of migratory breeding species like the cranes, swallows, Anna's hummingbird, some hawks. A lot of the winter visitors depart, like I was talking about, like the raptors, like the ferruginous hawk, rough-legged hawk. A lot of those waterfowl species, like the swans and greater white-fronted geese, snow geese, etc., and many duck species. Then not too far from now, it's hard to believe with us kind of kicking back into winter here, but not too far away is what I tend to call prime time of migration, which is basically late March through mid-May. And I was at 100 species at the end of January during my big year, and then I was at 200 species at the end of April. So a lot happens, in that period from late March to mid-May. It's a time when nearly all of the migratory breeding birds arrive. And I counted them up. It seems like there are, well, I counted them in detail. I counted 181 breeding birds in Plumas County that regularly breed in Plumas County. And a little more than half of them are migratory. Because we talked about those residents, the 85 or 90 residents. The balance of the breeding birds are migratory birds that come to breed in Plumas County. And then not only are a lot of these local breeding birds arriving, like warblers, vireos, tanagers, flycatchers, sparrows, blackbirds, waders like white-faced ibis. hawks, house wren, flammulated owl. Our only migratory owl in Plumas County is, well, long distance migratory owl is the flammulated owl. I have a slide of it further on. And then not only so these local breeders are arriving in migration, mostly from the south, but passage migrants that are passing through, going further north, also come through en masse during this time. A lot of the same types of species, shorebirds really add a lot to that. A lot of shorebirds that are headed up to breed in the Arctic and in Copper River Delta of Alaska and places like that. Flycatchers, etc. And then, yeah, so by the end of that prime time, I was at 225. And then you get these late arriving local breeders too, like willow flycatcher, Swainson's, thrush, common nighthawk, common poor-will, olive-sided flycatcher. And believe it or not, in this period, mid-May to mid-June, some of those long distance migrants at the end of this period are starting to migrate south again, almost kind of like depressing, you know, they just went through north and they're, a lot of them have really short nesting cycles. A lot of the shorebirds, like least sandpiper, western sandpiper that breed up in Alaska and the Arctic, they have really short breeding cycles, as do some of the hummingbirds, like the rufous hummingbird, and they're coming back down then. So here's, I tallied up just to give you a feel for how the big year went. Here is a table, and I know it's kind of a lot to digest probably, but it's by month. It has the months of 2022 on the left. And then the first column to the right of month is the number of bird species that I saw that month, that I identified that month. And then the next column is new species that were added to my total of birds for the year. So, and then the cumulative total on the right, you know, that is increasing with each month. So January is always the easiest to calculate. And it was really easy in this case because I found exactly 100 species that first month. So, you know, 100 species that month, 100 new species were added, and the cumulative total was 100 species. February, it was kind of, I was like, what's going on with February? And we're in February now, and it's kind of, it is kind of a, you know, in retrospect, it's a little bit of a, it's not totally stagnant. You can always find stuff every month, but it's not like hopping like some of the other months. Also, last year, February, I traveled a lot. I had a lot of big work deadlines. There was a lot of like sports travel for high school basketball and different things. Yeah, and I wondered how committed I was too by looking at this point. but anyhow, so this year I'm already like almost have 100 species for February. But last year only had 54, only added 7 new species in February. And then, you know, the cumulative total is 107. In March, things started to pick up. As I mentioned before, you get the early migration period starts to happen. A lot of birds start to go on the move. And so from March through the rest of the year, I was over 100 species for every month. In March, you know, added 31 new species to the total. April was a really big month, 169 species for the month and 59 new species to get it up there to 197. And then May, really big too, 170 for the month, added 28 species to finish May with 225 species. And then it slows down, and I'll get into some of the detail. You can see it's like, this is where you like see how committed you are to a big year, because you can see like the totals stay high, you know, June, 144 species, July, 159, August, 151. But you see there's only like, you know, 6 to 1 new species being added for each of those months. It does show the importance of like playing out the whole big year. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. In a big year, is it customary that you always do document the redundant species? Like the stellar day every time, or Or doesn't it take a lot of time just to do all that, or is it?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. You could, the way I do it, I think most birders do it, they're entering their birding outings on eBird.
Right.
So you keep a checklist of all the species you're seeing. That sounds kind of refreshing though, to just list the new But the thing is, from like a scientific or bird knowledge perspective,
It has.
there's a lot to be, because like as you see, like lately, like the robin flocks are really big right now and stuff. So that's scientific. On eBird, you're entering numbers of birds, you're getting spatial data of their locations. The dates are quite important. Like, so yeah, so it's I mean, in some way it does take time. There's eBird has this app in the field that you can enter as you're out in the field, and it's really user friendly. I tend to just do it when I get back home. I'm kind of old school. I keep field notes and then enter when I get back home. But that is a good question. It's tempting to sometimes if I'm like that Northern Shrike we saw the other day. I was kind of like in a hurry, and the Super Bowl was going on, and I just kind of like, oh, I just entered the Northern Shrike. And I added a few other species, but yeah. So yeah, so it slows down in those months after June. Yeah, and I'll talk in detail about some of how it slowed down and what was going on. So this period, prime time, this late March through mid-May, as I say, I was at 200 by May 1, and already talked about what species are arriving. Here are some slides. I think it's not only just because a lot of us like the arrival of spring, but it's an exciting time. You kind of been from either just from birding or long winter. You kind of got the cabin fever going and stuff, and all of a sudden these bright, beautiful yellow and red and all colored birds start to arrive in mass, and the vegetation starts to leaf out. The weather starts to warm up, and it's just an exciting time. And the birds, that's why they're coming. They're coming for food. They're coming for nesting sites. Here's 3 of our. Oh, I have a question. Got to throw a few quizzes in. How many warblers regularly occur in Plumas County? How many warbler species do you think regularly occur in Plumas County? There's 3 of them right here. Any guesses? None of them would be listed as a rarity in eBird. What?
11.
Yes. All right.
Drew, that's amazing.
How do you get that? Because it's your lucky number.
Yeah.
All right, I'll name them real quick here. This way, don't look bad by forgetting one. Orange crown warbler, Nashville warbler, McGillivrary's warbler, common yellowthroat, Wilson's warbler, yellow warbler, yellow rumped warbler, black-throated gray warbler, Townsend's warbler I counted, even that might be listed as a rarity. They tend to get seen every year. Hermit warbler, yellow-breasted chat, which I counted as a warbler. They're tending to like separate it from the warblers, but there you go. Was that 11? All right. You're right, Drew. We verified your correct guess. So what do we have here? Anyone who is not 100% certain want to take a guess at the one on the left? The one on the left. Sorry, I'm blocking your birds again, Bob. Look at that. It's a lot of yellow. Actually, it was kind of rusty. These streaks are kind of reddish rusty on the breast there, which is kind of cool. Had that rusty kind of streaks. Anyone want to take a big risk?
No.
Yes, yellow warbler. All right, how about this middle one? Not as like very beautifully patterned, but doesn't have a lot of these yellow or red tones. This one is kind of like, I kind of like a lot of the warblers, well, some of the warblers' names that are descriptive. This one has a descriptive name. A lot of bird species don't. They're named after some dude like this name, McGillivray or Wilson's or something, but this one is descriptive. Black-throated gray warbler. See that? Black throat, gray body. This is the male. It has this nice yellow spot in the lores area between the eye and the bill. And then on the right has this cool little cap. This is a very inquisitive bird, Bob, that I have seen on your property in little clumps of shrubbery, especially in the wetter parts of your property. But this one will respond to pishing quite well, maybe better than any of the other warblers. I think it's a very curious. Pishing is when you make some noise like this little warbler will come to check it out. Just a little guy. This is the male one with that black cap all the way. Anyone want to guess that one? Jeff?
You're just.
Yeah. Yes. You're a doctor. You got to know these.
It's the fishing black crown.
Wilson's warbler.
Yeah, that's.
It would definitely be on your property too, Jeff. All right. Oh man, look at this color here. Some of the migrants that are arriving. Both of these are breeders. In this time of the year, early in this time of the year, especially if you're like in kind of mid-April, you're getting the local breeders are arriving of these two species, and you're getting a lot of passage migrants. A couple of years ago, I was down by Oakland Camp on Spanish Creek and hit this amazing influx of the species on the right, Western tanager. And the person I was hiking with, we probably saw like 50 Western tanagers that were just like dripping from the alders and the cottonwoods along that part of Spanish Creek. And it was just amazing. I'd never seen anything like it, with the Western tanagers. It was between the swim hole, where you cross the creek, where there's the rope swim hole upstream from Spanish Creek. It was downstream from there to Oakland Camp, that stretch. Yeah. And then beautiful sort of neon blaze, or I guess blaze orange is probably a better description of the Bullock's oriole here, this orange oriole. Here's a couple, switching back to my photos, which aren't nearly as nice, but here's a couple species I got photos of that were good ones. These were both on the Chester Railroad grade along the North Fork of the Feather River. And these were both in early May. I think it was the same day I photographed both of these species. Interestingly, I think it may be the only one of this one on the left seen. It's usually a species that's seen quite a bit in Plumas County, but I don't recall anyone else entering a record for it last year. I could be wrong. But that is it's a kind of a flycatcher. Anyone know what kind of flycatcher? Close. In this case, it's a different genus.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of it looks smaller than it is, Dennis, in this photo. It's a pretty good sized flycatcher. And some clue would be that there's a rusty patch on the wings, and it has a sulfur leading edge on their primaries. Ashy throat. It's an ash-throated flycatcher. And then how about this one on the right? The chat, yes, which is one of the more vocally interesting, along with like the northern mockingbird. It's one of our more vocally interesting, repetitive, vocally birds. I think they have a sense of humor, actually. It's kind of, I wish I had I won't take the time to play a recording of it, but it's almost like they're often improvising. They repeat notes of 3 often, right, Lucinda, what did you say? And Dave? And well, they'll be kind of like, they kind of like, and then they'll pause for a while for effect. Very, very non-musical. But
But it throws in musical ones in between.
yeah, every now and
Goes
then, yeah.
Back and forth and
Yeah.
it's beautiful sound, and then it'll
Yeah.
go back to something
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. It's like, it's very like, it would be like it would be an improv comedian rather than a scripted. It's like, but they're very, I love listening to. I often they're the bird that makes me laugh the most when I hear them. Like, oh my God. Okay. So here's switching from like a bit kind of looking at some riparian mostly species. This is a view, and this is when I was first learning. This was in actually kind of like late March, early April in Sierra Valley. I was first learning. You can tell how bad these are, but first learning. But I share it partly to show like the Big Year is a learning journey, like, because I don't have a good camera. So I took all the photos I'm showing through my binoculars. There's a, you can basically like use your binoculars and use your cell phone, use your iPhone to like take pictures through it, or through a spotting scope, usually called digiscoping. And I still am not very good at it, but I was really bad there. But nonetheless, like on this left photo here, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. There's like lots of information in images, even if they're blurry. Like here on the left part of this slide, you see this one wading bird, shorebird, a large shorebird with its wings up. And it's very characteristic of the species to flash its wings. It has these white and black wings, and it uses a combination to startle potential predators and other birds in a territorial fashion, but also to startle prey. They'll actually do that to like scare prey, like aquatic insects and other things. And that is a willet, a really common breeding and large shorebird in Sierra Valley. And then the bird to the right of it here is a different species. And you might be able to perceive its bill is slightly upturned. Does that show up? Oh. And that is an avocet, an American avocet, which both breeds in Plumas County, and willets breed in high numbers in Sierra Valley. I once, when the Audubon Society was working on its continental important bird areas, they had this project where they declared important bird areas. And in our area, Sierra Valley is one, Lake Almanor is one. I think Mountain Meadows is one. And I was giving them data to help with that and help with that designation. But as we estimated, there were up to like 500 breeding pairs of willets in Sierra Valley in good years when the conditions are good. And then there's some big birds in the middle here that you can tell the relative size. They're big, like willets and avocets are big. So these are also big birds. They happen to be godwits, marbled godwits, which is a good bird for Plumas County, and definitely like hitting the Sierra Valley wetlands. One thing, if you're thinking about spring migration, fall migration, spring migration tends to be much more productive from a shorebird and wading bird perspective in Sierra Valley than Lake Almanor. So it's the place to hit for spring migration for shorebirds and other water birds, mainly because Almanor is almost always full in the spring. So it doesn't have a lot of mud. It doesn't like have mud flats. It's all pretty much full. And there's not a lot of the habitat shorebirds like necessarily. And sometimes it's also like still has snow. So it's usually because of the water. Whereas Sierra Valley has water during this time in the spring migration. But then it's the opposite in the fall. Sierra Valley, all too often, unfortunately, by late summer, partly because of the irrigation practices and over allocation of water in Sierra Valley, and natural drying, tends to dry up. A lot of these flats, like this is along Harriet Lane in the middle of Sierra Valley, they tend to dry up. So a lot of the shorebirds and waders are looking for very shallow, muddy water where the invertebrates they like to feed on and mollusks and stuff hang out. So it's kind of so hit Sierra Valley, wetlands and flats, places like Harriet Lane, Roberti Ranch in the spring, and Almanor is the place for shorebirds in the fall. So this other one here, more lame, fuzzy photos, but you can kind of perceive the Godwit's orange upturned bill. And then look at I don't know if you can see these black bellies on some of these little peeps here, these little calidrus peeps, sandpiper. Well, they're kind of a sandpiper. They're dunlins in breeding plumage. The dunlins have black bellies when they're in breeding plumage. But that's kind of just to give you a feel like kind of what a typical look along Harriet Lane. If you hit it right, you'll get a lot of cool species in there. Here's a couple others that found that day. This is if you like, depends on if you've been taught birding by a British person or not. British people often call these kinds of birds, like killdeer is one of them, plovers, like lover, plover. I can tell Dennis likes the plover pronunciation. Oh, he does it. He likes lover, plover. Yeah. I always thought, yeah, kind of funny. My ornithology teacher at UC Davis was a South African man. He's plovers, you know. But it's so depending on how you like to say it, this is a plover or a plover, and this one is a inbreeding plumage, and it's a black-bellied plover. It's got plover. Now you got me. Probably some small least sandpipers in the back. And interestingly, avocet, even though it's the same day, an American avocet in breeding plumage, you know, a lot of times, you know, it's kind of like, I love like crystal clear photos and stuff, but this is often what you're looking at in the field. You know, you're often getting a quick look at something, fuzzy look at something. You can see a little bit of the orange on the head and the neck of the American avocet here. And then this is a little bit better photo of, it's got yellow legs is one hint. But which yellow legs is it? You know what one is. No, I'm just kidding. Anyone know which one this is? There's two species of yellow legs that migrate through Plumas County. You especially see them in the spring. You sometimes see them in the fall too. You see them in the fall too.
It's a yellow legs.
It is a yellow legs. But which kind? Which of the two?
There's greater and the lesser, so that one looks kind of big. I'll say greater.
Your daughter was right.
I said lesser.
It's mainly in the bill. Like silly me, I didn't include a comparative slide of the greater, but the bill, generally bill length, lesser, yeah, it's relative. It is a big bird, Dennis, but if you were to see the greater next to it, it would be about 25 to 30% taller. And then the bill is instructive too. Like the lesser yellow legs here has a very thin, very straight bill that is about the length of the width of its head, maybe slightly longer. Whereas the greater yellow legs its bill is at least twice that thick proportionately, and it up curves slightly, and it's almost twice as long, the bill. Like with a greater yellow legs, if you I mean, it's sort of like a weird thought, but if you push the bill back into the head, like this bill would barely go through the skull, you know? Whereas the greater yellow legs, it would be like twice the length of the head, twice the width of the head, if that makes sense. I should have had a comparative slide. Sorry about that. Let me get back into regular presentation mode here. Whoa, that was weird. One of the things disappeared. Thought I had two slides. Oh, there they are. That's weird. Disappeared when I went. Whoa. Maybe I'll stay in this mode for a second. Some other species that arrive this time in the wetlands are the white-faced ibis on the left. And this is a really pretty version of this, but does anyone know this species on top of a sage, or that might even be a greasewood there? Who said that? Sage thrasher, yes. They're quite early. They arrive quite early, sometimes even mid-March for the sage thrashers. But and then I wanted to highlight this triplet here, this trio. These are the three longest distance migrants to Plumas County. And they all occur throughout the county. They all occur together most commonly in Sierra Valley. On the left, these all tend to arrive. Well, the hawk on the left tends to arrive in mid-April. The swallows in the middle, also in mid-April, and then on the right, we have a phalarope, a Wilson's phalarope, which is kind of a late arriving of the wetland species. It tends to arrive like in early May. But it's the hawk on the left, it spends its winter on the pampas of Argentina, primarily is where it winters. So way down in South America, in the grasslands of South America, usually called the pampas, is where it's most commonly wintering. So I'm always amazed when they arrive, like, oh my gosh, you've had such a, thousands of mile journey to get here. Welcome, and it's the Swainson's hawk, a really long distance migrant. And then a colonial nesting swallow, the cliff swallows, which nest under a lot of our bridges, all around here in American Valley, Indian Valley, Genesee Valley. The Steel Bridge in Sierra Valley has a really huge colony of cliff swallows that nest, and they build those really characteristic mud nests that are like that form a cavity just with a little opening in them. And they also winter. They winter more broadly in South America, but including northern Chile, a lot of Argentina. A lot of their wintering ground is in Argentina. Then on up through the west coast of South America, including Peru. And then I think also amazingly, and this is quite a common species in wet years in Sierra Valley, is this phalarope, the Wilson's phalarope. It's a kind of a shorebird, has a really interesting foraging habitat of swimming in circles to create eddies that eddy up potential insects that they then go into the middle of the eddy and pick them out of the eddy. So they're kind of you see these twirling swimming shorebirds out there. They're often these Wilson's phalaropes. And this interestingly is a female Wilson's phalarope. They have reverse polymorphism where the females are more colorful than the males. And this is definitely a very colorful female. So just kind of checking back in, maybe I don't need to show this table quite so much, but that kind of took us, into May. And as you can see, been like really adding a lot of species, to 225 by the end of May. There's this kind of small but important set that one general strategy in a big year is to like get all the breeding species. And they're not always, some breeding species, like some of the owls, are hard to find. But a lot of these late stragglers that I call them late stragglers, they are late arriving migrants that generally arrive from mid-May into mid-June. But they include species like the willow flycatcher, which is a state endangered species, Swainson's thrush, a really rare species in the Sierra, common nighthawk, common poorwill, which are two caprimulgid, what's a name besides goat sucker for these guys? Nightjars, yeah, goat suckers always seems offensive to these birds somehow. And olive-sided flycatcher. As I mentioned, during this, some of the long distance migrants actually at the end of this period in June start heading south again. Here's this is a screenshot from eBird that is a list of the species and the dates. The list of the species I saw during my big year with the number of each bird. Like on the bottom there, Townsend's warbler was the 210th species that I had seen last year. And I saw it on May 12th at the public beach at Lake Almanor in some pine trees right behind the beach there. I wanted to show this just to kind of illustrate a lot of the species during this time frame of mid-May to mid-June, essentially the migration is finishing out. The spring migration is finishing out. So as you can see there, sort of got one last passage migrant, Townsend's warbler, kind of a late migrating Townsend's warbler. But then you kind of really kick into, and I'm presuming, you know, if you're big year birding and you're trying to get as many species as possible, you kind of kick into, you've been hitting the migration spots as frequently as you can, and now you switch into looking for breeding birds pretty much. And you have some time to, you know, you're kind of like it's not that you want the migration to be done, but it's done, and you can kind of be strategic using data from eBird, using your own local knowledge to go look for birds where the habitat's best. And that's, you know, kind of reflected. And some of these are these late arrivers, like the olive-sided flycatcher was up by the Bucks Lake Wilderness. I remember, Ryan, you found that one and I saw it on there and I went after it. Swainson's thrush, a late arriver. Mockingbird, kind of a random mockingbird on Beckworth Pass. I was actually looking for black-throated sparrows. The mockingbirds actually breed in the Great Basin just east of Plumas County, like around Reno, around Hurlong, around Susanville. They breed in that western Great Basin. But interestingly, they hardly ever, so it didn't surprise me to see one on Beckworth Pass. It was singing, it was jumping and singing and jumping and singing. I thought it might have had a mate, but it wasn't there a week later. So northern pygmy owl, Virginia rail, flammulated owl, the only long distance migratory owl. It's kind of a southern Mexico, Central America wintering owl. Cedar waxwings, they probably don't breed here, so they were probably kind of late leaving. Blackback woodpecker, Canada jay. When I was starting to work on this presentation, I had this fantasy I would show a slide of every single species, but then I realized it would take me like 2 months to create the PowerPoint presentation, and it would crash all technology in Plumas County. Canada jay is a cool, there's a few species that, as I say, if you want to, it's important if you're going for a high big year number to get all the breeding birds. There's some like field trips that you look forward to do that. One is a Canada jay. It used to be called a gray jay until very recently. They changed the name from gray jay to Canada jay. And they're pretty regular in Lassen National Park. And in the winter and spring, they seem to come down slope and hang out for a while, as far down as Chester, but especially like around Domingo Springs and Upper Rice Creek, like the Upper North Fork. So you get to venture up into that really neat country. Warner Valley, sometimes they're in northern Warner Valley around Drakesbad. So it's just a cool, I got the blackback woodpecker on that same trip, but that's kind of a special field trip you have to take for that species. Around Chester, the Chester Railroad Grade, there's lots of willow flycatchers, a rare species overall, but that's one of their biggest populations in the state is right there at Chester. Northern goshawk's is pretty hard to get. Very secretive bird. I just got lucky driving up the China Grade and saw one fly across the road. Let's see, what do we got here? So then, yeah, common nighthawk, common poorwill, more late arriving breeding birds, and those, in that case, nocturnal ones. But so here's a slide of some of these late arriving breeding birds, late migrants. This is willow flycatcher, Impidinax, a tough one to identify. You know, their vocalizations. That's one thing unfortunately, my hearing, I realized during the course of this big year, my hearing wasn't what it was 15 to 20 years ago when I was birding a lot. And that was hard in some ways. Actually, I would sometimes be looking at species right in front of me, like a brown creeper or a golden crowned kinglet, or even a bush tit, definitely cedar waxwings, and you know, not able to hear them unless they change, you know, unless they make a different note or something. And that was pretty depressing. It's actually, when I used to professionally do a lot of bird surveys and research and point counts, I used my ears all the time, and it was kind of I considered it my strength as a birder. I guess one silver lining is that I feel like my vision got better during the course of the year. I was actually having to I'm more auditory than visual, like as a learner, as a person. And but I wanted to, do well at the big year, but I kind of had to relearn into a more visual way. I used to be someone who walked through the forest and just like, oh, there's that, there's that, there's that. I could have my head down and just be naming everything. And I can't anymore, as Lucinda can attest, who has really good hearing. She would be hearing things during our Christmas bird count, like, what's all that chatter over there? There is no chatter over there. What are you talking about? But sometimes I can hear like medium to low pitch quite well still. Here's this one interesting thing I'm noticing about these late arriving. I think it's just coincidence that they're all like brown. All the late arriving birds are brown color. No, I don't know why. This is another really cool combo. I love birding in the Lakes Basin. I love wildflower walking in the Lakes Basin. It's probably my favorite place in the Feather River watershed, along with Lassen Volcanic National Park. And yet, if you like live in Quincy and you bird around Quincy, American Valley, and up around Almanor or some, there's kind of like not a lot of new stuff you're going to get in the Lakes Basin, even though it's like so beautiful. But you've probably already, by the time the snow has melted there and the birds have arrived there and stuff, there's not a lot of reason to go there for new species for a big year. All kinds of reasons to go for beauty and jumping in lakes and wildflowers and everything. But two of the ones you would go for, I only have a picture of the one, is a Swainson's thrush here on the left, a really rare. A lot of us are used to more common, especially in the winter here, hermit thrushes, which they both give these echoing, both the Swainson's and the hermit thrush give these echoing flute-like songs. The hermit thrush is, it almost sounds like it's a little downward, its pitch is going downward, kind of goes an introductory note like, whereas the Swainson's thrush is more of like it sounds like upward spiraling pitch in a well or something. And it accelerates. The hermit thrush decelerates, I would say. The Swainson's thrush just kind of goes, gets higher and accelerates in pitch. And you can find Swainson's thrush in Boyle Ravine usually, right up behind us. The UC Forestry Camp is a good spot, but the Lakes Basin is a really, really good spot, like the Bear Lake Trailhead. All the springs that emanate from around the Bear Lakes Loop Trailhead have a lot of Swainson's thrush. They love the mountain alder willow combo, especially like dense mountain alders. And that's a great place. I was after a hike one time this past year. I heard 4 singing at a time, 4 Swainson's thrushes right there. And then the other bird that is in the Lakes Basin is the pine grosbeak. That is like, it's the only like regular place you can get it in Plumas County. So it's like a glorious trip to go for that Swainson thrush and pine grosbeak combination. And then on the right here, we have the flammulated owl, that long distance neotropical migratory owl that winters, our only long distance migratory owl, winters down in Central America and Southern Mexico, and is very, very secretive and very, these have a really low hoot that you can't really, it's ventriloquial, you can't tell where it's coming from. They especially like East Side pine. They hang out in some around, I've heard them on like the Butterfly Valley Road and Black Hawk Creek area. And they were up along Little Schneider Creek too this year when they were doing a lot of frog surveys. There were a couple pairs that were hooting around there, but they're really common around Lake Davis and in the East Side pine of kind of between Lake Davis and Frenchman Lake. The fires hit a lot of that, but they're just really common in that area in the East Side pine forest. Flammulated owl, yeah, and they have this really low kind of. I bet I can't think of it. No. like that. Yeah, it's really, really soft, really quiet, and they're really hard to get a pinpoint on. Sometimes you'll be looking around, where's that coming from? But they are common. That's the one thing you can. And then two other nocturnal species that are these in this late arriving category. I gotta look what time it is. We got
I'm about 15 minutes late. so
Okay,
technically you can
8:20. Yeah,
like
okay,
5 minutes past an hour.
okay,
I apologize, Kim.
yeah. And were we supposed to finish by 8:30? I can't remember.
I didn't put an end time, I just put a start time.
Okay, okay. Oh,
Everybody in the room.
yeah.
Start at 7 and when everyone's comfortable.
So these two arrived late. One is kind of easy to find because they're big on the left, and they're often out while it's still light outside, even though they're called the nighthawk, common nighthawk. And they're vocal too. They have two kinds of ways of emanating sound. I guess I shouldn't necessarily call it vocalized. One is they dive, and their tail feathers make this really interesting. It goes, and it's their tail feathers that make that noise. And then they also give like a beer, beer as they fly around eating insects with their big mouths. But that's the common nighthawk. And they're really later. They often won't arrive until early June. And then this other one is a common poorwill. And yeah, these are both in the nightjar family, two nocturnal species. If you're in the east, I grew up in eastern Plumas County, Portola area. And again, like around Lake Davis, Crocker Ridge, Eastside Pine Forest area, a lot of times you'll flush these from roads. If you're doing a lot of owl surveys at night, you'd be flushing these from the roads. They have this interesting kind of reddish orange eye shine that really gets you. And they have they're one that's named after their vocalization, common poorwill. They go, poorwill, poorwill. They should be called the poorwill gulp, I guess, because they kind of go, poorwill gulp, poorwill gulp. Couple more late arrivals. This is actually, the one on the left is a immature black-throated sparrow. There was one in the course of a big year, you make certain discoveries, and one that was fun to make was documenting breeding for black-throated sparrows for the first time in the Feather River watershed in Plumas County, and in the Feather River watershed. No, probably, yeah, I think the whole watershed. But anyway, this is the adults have a real black throat, but this is what the immatures look like. This was in July, and they were foraging around in this really big mixed flock with like 30 brewer sparrows. And then this is a Cordilleran flycatcher, another species you have to make a special trip for. It only occurs in one place that's known in Plumas County, and it's up in Swain Meadow, which is north of Westwood. Like if you drive to Westwood and then you take County Road A20, what is that, A24, A20, there's a county road that you can take from Westwood that takes you on a cutoff to Highway 44. A21, yeah. And interestingly, you're in Lassen County that almost the whole way on that A21, but there's this little place where you blip into Plumas County, and there's a cool meadow there called Swain Meadow. But there's a large population of Cordilleran flycatchers, which kind of recently got split from Pacific Slope they were all called Western flycatchers, and then they got split into Pacific Slope flycatchers, which are predominantly on the Pacific Slope, drainages that flows towards the Pacific, and Cordilleran is more of a Great Basin species. But yeah, I found that this year, and they're really hard to tell from Pacific Slope flycatchers, but they have a little bit different song and a little bit different bill morphology. So now we're into June, where the numbers really drop off here, I'm afraid. I'm going to go back into presentation mode. And unfortunately here, you look at the bottom, this is again from my eBird list for 2022. These last 3, chestnut-back chickadee, spotted owl, which I went with Colin and a crew to hoot for and find the nest of a spotted owl pair up in the Deer Creek watershed. Pine grosbeak in the Lakes Basin, and those are really the last 3. That the pine grosbeak being in early July there in the Lakes Basin. I had really been focusing until then on breeding species. I mean, catching the spring migration when it came through, but then really in a targeted way going after breeding species based on my knowledge of their habitat use, based a lot on where they occurred in the past in eBird. You can look on eBird, do a lot of research about where in years past people have found species. There wasn't like a whole lot of birding going on in Plumas County this year. There's really good birders in Plumas County, but you have to find a lot of your own species. I got plenty of help along the way, but you have to find a lot of your own species too. But so those are kind of like the last breeders, and then it went into searches for, except for Rufous ground sparrows, a breeder too. But it went into searches for rare birds, and then getting into migration, which kicks in with the shorebirds really in July and August. You know, a lot of the shorebirds are coming through again. And then in August, a lot of the warblers and other species start migrating south. But the list got really slow, as you could see, and really kind of tedious after that. Lawrence's goldfinch, goldfinch, Nuttall's woodpecker, gray catbird, first ever gray catbird for Plumas County. I didn't find it. That was one that one of Ryan Burnett's crew found. But these are all rare species. These are all species that show up in eBird as rare. And that's partly why the number slowed down so much. You know, that's partly why you run out of breeding regularly occurring species basically by mid-June, and then you're looking for rarities the rest of the year. If you've really birded hard. So as an aside, and some of this is, you know, I mentioned in the other presentation, but there are what some of us like to call near misses and nemesis birds. There's a really famous nemesis bird in Quincy right now that my friend Colin, we've even named this nemesis bird Slippery Harold, because Colin has looked for it like 12 times. Different people have found this. It's a northern mockingbird, and we keep seeing it and putting on the eBird and stuff, and Colin like shows up right after someone sees it and it's gone. So it's his true nemesis. And it seems like it's been in town for like multiple months now. But anyway, in terms of near misses for me, when you're doing a big year, ideally you would have pre-prepped for anything you could see. You know, you would know all your eastern warblers, your eastern vireos species from Texas. You know, you'd kind of know anything you could potentially see, or taken courses on it or whatever. But it had been a long time since I'd birded seriously, 15 to 20 years, and I wasn't totally up on like eastern warblers and vireos and stuff. So I had these moments where I was looking at a flock of warbling vireos in June along Spanish Creek. This one vireo popped in. It was bigger, had a wider belly, had like dark eye lines and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's different, you know. But then 3 seconds later, it flies off, you know. And one of the lessons learned I'll share later is that I started looking at my field guide too soon. I should have just kept watching the bird and see where it went. You know, one of my big lessons of the year was keep the eye on the prize. You know, if you look down at the field guide, if you like are trying to take a picture too soon and you don't know what it is, that's generally not a good idea, especially with digiscoping, because it's kind of tricky to get your camera on your binoculars and stuff. But anyway, so these are all species that I think are 80% probability or higher that they were these species. but it didn't pass the threshold of where I felt comfortable listing it in eBird. One was a red-eyed vireo in June along Spanish Creek at FRC. Another was a chestnut-sided warbler, male, pretty, there's maybe more like 90% on that one. A clay-colored sparrow. This one's a little different in that it was actually accepted as an eBird record, initially called it a clay-colored, and then I rescinded it once I studied the species more. Swamp sparrow is one that fits into this category. I'd seen what I thought was a swamp sparrow at Snake Lake, but I didn't feel comfortable listing it. But I studied the heck out of it. A lot of times with these misses, like they're the species you get to know the most because like, I'm almost certain, but I'm not certain. So you like really study up on it. The interesting thing about the swamp sparrow, ended up like finding like four different other swamp sparrows during the course of the year, which is a really rare bird for Plumas County. Partly because of this near miss that like drove me mad, wanting to make sure I didn't miss another swamp sparrow. And then another one that Colin and Rob Wade and I had at Lake Almanor was a likely trumpeter swan. I'd say highly likely trumpeter swan. It was flying in a big flock of tundra swans. Its neck was at least like 40% longer than the other swans. It wasn't vocalizing. And then Colin didn't get his camera up in time, and they kind of got out of distance. So we didn't get a good picture of it and stuff, but it's highly likely. We saw like 1,100 swans fly over us. This one really stuck out, but we didn't feel comfortable. It didn't pass the kind of 99% confidence. And then some of my nemesis birds for the year were snowy egret. I could not find a snowy egret for the life of me. There were 3 or 4 other, I probably saw 400 great egrets during the course of the year, mostly at Lake Almanor and Sierra Valley, but snowy egret, there were 3 or 4 sightings. I could not get it. Purple martin is another one that was seen a couple times in the Chester area. And then Scott Edwards had given us some good intel on like how he used to find them 10 years ago, on often hanging out with violet green swallows that really line up along the power poles around American Valley sometimes by the hundreds. And man, I got really good at identifying violet green swallows and other swallows. I scoped like thousands and thousands of swallows, but no purple martin. Except at Fort Bragg. When we were in Fort Bragg eating seafood, they nest Noyo Harbor. Purple martins nest like on the big bridge across the Noyo River at Fort Bragg, and they really have like their vocalization really sticks out, really loud and kind of erratic. And short-eared owl was a nemesis of mine that I looked for at least 10 different nights in Sierra Valley. And then finally got it on the Christmas bird count, the Lake Almanor Christmas bird count. That was my last species that was a new species of the year. And northern shrike was another one. I must have hiked Learning Landscape Trail and drove the Beckwourth, Tennessee Road like 20 times looking for northern shrike. But then partly because I was like studying them a lot, we found one this year, right at Greenhorn Creek Bridge on Quincy Junction Road. You pass the Gillespie Ranch turn in, cross Greenhorn as you're headed towards Chandler Road, and just upstream on Greenhorn Creek, right there, this northern shrike was foraging around. Scott Edwards had seen it about a month before that. And then red-naped yellow-bellied sapsucker, had some kind of potential run-ins with those all year, and studied up on those a lot, and finally found one this year. So that's one of the ironies of a big year, is you're sort of most prepared to do a big year right after you've done a big year, because you kind of know all the spots, you study up on the species. But then, my life isn't consistent with having a big year again this year. Gonna have other kinds of big years, supporting my kids, making money, have some good conservation work going, conservation projects. So yeah, I covered this, the swamp sparrow, keeping your eyes on the prize. I really can't. The other thing with me taking the eyes off a prize or not, because I'm prone to like pleasing, is like you're looking at a bird and your friend's like, oh, where is it? And you take your binoculars down and go, it's over there, And instead of like, if you see a bird and your friend wants to know where it is, try to get good at like keeping your binoculars on it and like seeing features around it without taking your eye off the bird, instead of like, hey, oh yeah, see here you and get right next to them. And that's often when you lose a bird, and it's just maddening. That happened to me several times. I seem to still not be learning that lesson. Like it's been like with Colin's nemesis, Northern Mockingbird. Yeah, gosh, I was like, I couldn't resist getting a picture of it. And when I was getting a picture of it, it flew off. Like, cause Colin's like offering like large rewards now for like getting him this mockingbird. And I lost it. And it was only like 20 feet from me. And I'm like, and I still lost it. Like, this is a weird mockingbird though. I think he's messing with us. So anyhow, here's a Liz Ramsey photo of a beautiful swamp sparrow on the Lenhart Learning Landscape. Looks quite, you could confuse it with a song sparrow or maybe a Lincoln sparrow. Has a lot of this deep rusty color on its throughout its primaries and greater secondary coverts there. And then its tail's quite rusty. What else? It has a eye line behind the eye, but not in front of the eye. It has bicolored bill, a lot of dark streaks on the back. And notably blurry streaks on the flanks, like song sparrows, Lincoln sparrows. Like song sparrows have big streaks that are kind of blurry. Lincoln sparrows have very fine streaks throughout. But this swamp sparrow has very sort of a buffy, rusty tone on its flanks with blurry, or sometimes no streaks. But yeah, the Lenhart Learning Landscape in Quincy here ended up being like Sparrow City. There was one time I was with Rob Wade and we got like 11 sparrow species in one outing, including, it was kind of when you guys were hitting it too, it was like white-throated sparrow, swamp sparrow, Lincoln sparrow. I think there were chipping sparrows that day, golden crown, white crown. It was just like, it's like really, and then spotted towhees are sparrows too. So then sort of taking it home here, and I appreciate you all like staying, even though we started late and it's a late night in inclement weather. But this was the last 6 species. And as you can see, none of them breeders, all of them quite rare, except for the short-eared owl was rare this year. Like no one had a short-eared owl until this short-eared owl. So it was a rare species this year. They're an eruptive species. They're really tied to vole populations. So some years in Sierra Valley, there's a lot of short-eared owls. This year there weren't any. But we got one on the Christmas bird count on. But anyhow, I'll go into this like home stretch of some of these species. This was just highlighting a couple of them. This Pacific loon was a special experience for me because this is a species that, especially with Colin, but in different groups of us, we had gone looking for Pacific loons a lot on Lake Almanor several times, had looked at hundreds of common loons, a lot of other, really cool grebes and other species, including rare ones like the redneck grebe and the red-breasted merganser. But despite the fact that Pacific loons are seen almost every year at Lake Almanor, we hadn't seen a Pacific loon. 2 days before this, I had done a really long day of birding with Colin Dillingham and Rob Wade. And it was a great day of birding, but another one of these ones where we had like 100 species and no new species for me, where, all right, I'm still enjoying this. But at the very end of the night, I remember at the Canyon Dam boat ramp, and it was just getting dark. We did find a red-breasted merganser that Colin hadn't had yet that year. Long distance in a scope. We were like long scoping, but it was getting dark. I saw that group of loons, like 5 loons together, and I thought one looked a little different, a little lighter in the head, had a different impression. Its bill didn't look as big, but it was dark. There's no way you could have called it. I had like what did I have? I had something the next day. I couldn't go look for it the next morning, but I went the morning, 2 days after I went in the morning. And right from the that boat launch area, there's actually a rest. There's a vista point off of Highway 147 where you turn at Canyon Dam, head to Westwood. First turnout on your left is a vista point. You look down on the. But anyway, there had been this fog, and I was there in the late morning, but the fog cleared just before this shot. And I was scanning around. All of a sudden, I see this bird swimming towards me, not that far away, and it just had this energy of, and we'd probably gone specifically looking for it at least 10 times. It just had this energy that I encountered a lot during the big year of, there you are, where have you been? I've been with me and birding. That's kind of been my pattern with birding, is that for some reason, life's busyness, kids, marriages, the day-to-day busyness, I just lost track with that part of my purpose and my passion. And I found it in this Pacific loon and in a lot of the people I've birded with this year. A lot of people I used to bird with all the time, like Colin Dillingham and Ryan Burnett and some with Scott Edwards and my friend Dave Griffin in Arizona. And they kind of had that same attitude, like, we know you've been busy. Where have you been? Oh, there you are. It's good to have you back, kind of. And this loon had that same energy. And it was also a significant one because it tied the big year record. And swam closer. It actually gave me quite good looks. You can see in this shot, although my digiscopes are always slightly, they're not like Ryan Bauer's perfectly crystal clear photos, but you can see a lot in this one. They have the first year birds, the first winter birds, they have a very light nape and head. They're this sort of silvery gray color. And they have a very thin bill relative to the common loons. And this really cool wavy back scapular pattern, which really pops out in these first year birds. It just gave me kind of a nice swim by and good looks. I've seen them on the ocean before, but never in Plumas County. So it was a first Plumas County bird for me. More shots of the Pacific loon. And then one thing about, you learn a lot about the birds when you observe them carefully. One thing I was noticing about this Pacific loon relative to the common loons, they take really long dives. They'll be down, they'll dive, they're feeding for fish and invertebrates, and they eat a lot of crawdads too. And they'll be down for like 5 minutes, it's like, where'd this bird go? And they're really fast swimmers underwater, so they cover a lot of ground. But anyway, this one took one dive, reverse course. Right after I saw it here, it took one dive and disappeared out of sight, and I didn't see it again. I watched it for about 5 minutes. But I was really grateful. I was grateful for following up on the impression. A lot of these near misses are impressionistic, sometimes maddening. Like if I wouldn't have gone back to check on that possible Pacific loon with Rob and Colin, wouldn't have known. But it kind of verified the hunch, and it was a beautiful day on a beautiful morning on Lake Almanar. And then the record-breaking duck, and this is a photo by Ryan Bauer, who took much better photos of it than me. He actually found the bird too on November 23rd, a couple days after my birthday. And this was number 252. And I think, and not only did it break the individual big year record, but it also broke, which was important to me, and I think to more than just me, it broke the collective big year record for all birders, the combined total for all birders in Plumas County of 260 species in 1 year. So it was a momentous occasion on many occasions, for many reasons, including, I think, and I don't know if you've thought of this, Ryan, but those of us who bird a lot in Plumas County, we tend to go to Lake Almanar a lot, Sierra Valley a lot, high country like Lassen and Lakes Basin and stuff. And Ryan and I are both Eastern Plumas County boys. We both grew up in Eastern Plumas County. And this bird was in the Gray Eagle Mill Pond. We talk about bird in lakes, the big wetlands of Sierra Valley. This really rare duck that had only been seen once before, a long time ago in Plumas County, like I can't remember, like early 90s or something like that. By is that what you at Elmore? I remember seeing it in eBird. It was one of those ones like Dan Arola 91, no picture, you know, but he's a good birder, so I would trust him. But yeah, so it felt significant in that, like, you know, living here in Quincy, growing up in the Portola, Gray Eagle area, like bird your backyard too, you know, bird, check your home ground. You don't always have to take the trip to the birding hotspot, because birds move, you know, birds are moving through. They're looking for places to land and feed. And this long-tailed duck liked what it saw on the mill pond. Here's another shot by Ryan. Really beautiful duck. This is a first-year male, and it hasn't grown out its really long tail. They have these really long tails. And Liz knows them well because they winter on the Great Lakes too, and she grew up on the Great Lakes. But a beautiful duck. You know, they have this sort of pinkish bill, white head, little smudgy cheek patch. A lot of really beautiful, I think, brown and chestnut colors in the wings. They have these long plumes on their scapulars, on their back, that kind of come over, these white plumes. And here is its range map, the long-tailed duck. You can see it, the orange is its breeding territory. They breed up in usually small lakes, small ponds to big lakes up in the tundra, up in the Arctic is their breeding zone. And the yellow shows their migratory pathways. And you can see they winter along, the blue is wintering. They winter along the Alaskan coast all the way down into British Columbia coast, and a little bit down into Washington and maybe the very northern part of the Oregon coast. And then you can see they also winter around the Great Lakes and the North Atlantic seaboard. But to have one down here at the Gray Eagle Mill Pond is a really unusual, really unusual thing. And this was, as I was going through the big year, you know, there were lots of people who, relative to a big year in an urban area or a national big year, where people are pretty much just checking the rare bird alert and they're going to where birds have already been seen. You're pretty much just logistically trying to go where people have already seen birds. A rural, local area like ours, you're gonna have to find a lot of your own birds, you know. And I did go through the rare birds I found, and I found about 3/4 of them without a rare bird alert, you know, without someone else finding it first. But this last run of birds, there were a lot of the birds were found by people like Ryan and by Scott Edwards. And Colin Christy Jameson found a Harris's sparrow at her house in Sierra Valley and texted me about it. Colin Dillingham, who is the spotting scope scan master. If you ever go birding with Colin, try to go birding with him when he's on the scope. He's amazing, and he can like identify birds 2 miles away with a scope, and he's diligent about it. He's very thorough. I call him Scan Master Dillingham. and he also, like, he looks at every bird. One bird I didn't even mention that most people just don't get in hardly ever in a big year is a tricolored blackbird. A lot of people misidentify tricolored blackbirds, but they're not. I think they occur pretty much every year, usually in the spring, usually in really large flocks of red-winged blackbirds. And man, he'll just scan a flock of red-winged blackbirds, like, you know, it's like 500 red-winged blackbirds, and pull out the tricolored blackbird. And he'll generously show you, like, here it is. See, the underwing is bright white instead of that yellow color. And the bill's a bit more sharp and pointy, and they're a little bit more glossy. And like, oh yeah, I see that. And it's a little bit of size difference and stuff. Same with, he found me a Lapland longspur in like a flock of like 800 horned larks, you know. And we were both looking for it, and he pulled it out of there, the scan master. So here was our little post bird celebration with Rachel and Angie Dillingham with our 252, marking the 252 at the mill pond, which I never would have, if I was to bet on locations where you'd find the record-breaking bird, the Gray Eagle. I mean, there's good ducks at the mill pond, but you know, I don't think of it as like a rarity kind of a spot, you know. So I was delighted. I had just finished I was starting to, I was sort of, man, I'd been birding so much, like on the learning landscape and stuff. I just finished like a probably hour and a half hike on the learning landscape looking for northern shrikes. And Ryan texted me and Colin said, man, what's this duck? Is it a long-tailed duck? And Colin's like, yes. And I'm like, I think so. And I just got in my car and started speed because it was almost sunset. It was getting, there was only about a half hour more of light. So I sped up there, and Ryan very generously was babysitting the bird. He didn't take his eye off the prize. I'd have been like texting everybody and like trying to get photos, and it would have flown off or something. But he watched it for me and Rob and others, Angie, Rachel, and other birders, and then a whole bunch of birds. This is one of these birds like the brambling that was on Bell Lane that attracted a lot of birds from out of the area because it's that rare of a species. And here's Ryan and I doing not so good of a 252. And we're doing a 525. And I hadn't been drinking at this point, but somehow couldn't coordinate a 252. But maybe that'll be the new big year record, 525. That was a fun moment that I'll always remember. So in closing, just have a few closing slides here. Lessons learned. I've articulated some of these during the presentation, but I don't need to pound on this one anymore. But keep your eyes on the prize. This is a really big one. You can point out a bird to who you're with without taking your binoculars down. Wait till you get great looks at it and know it's not very mobile before you take a picture. Things like that. Hit the home grounds and waters. I think for those of us a lot of us, except for BB, well, BB, you're here and in Genesee Valley, two great birding spots, are right here in American Valley. American Valley is a great valley for birding. You know, it's sometimes we think of Sierra Valley, Almanor and stuff, but man, we have Spanish Creek, we have Greenhorn Creek, we have wet meadows, low enough elevation, the snow usually melts, so the raptors often come in. There are wetlands, there are amazing forests around the perimeter of the valley. There are great montane chaparral fields, you know, where you have like wren tits and bush tits, all kinds of cool chaparral species. So yeah, bird the home grounds. And then birds are moving too, you know, it's a movable feast. Birds are gonna, just because you didn't get something along the Gansner Park bike path one day, or on Carroll Lane East one day, hit it again. The birds are moving, especially when birds are moving in migration, you know. There were times, you know, one of my highlights early in the year was seeing like, I saw about 90 yellow-rumped warblers. I think I saw you guys maybe that day. You were birding on the bike path by Gansner Park, and it was kind of in late March or something. And I was just flabbergasted. I had no idea there could be so many birds along the bike path in Gansner Park. And there were other, you know, cool species like tons of Buick's wrens, and there's, you know, Wilson's warblers moving through. And so really neat. We live in a really cool area for birding. Don't, you know, ask for help. One wonderful thing about our local birding community, very non-territorial. There's a lot of really people who like to share their knowledge. So don't hesitate to ask for help. It's certainly me. I'm introverted. I tend not to ask for help, but it really, I learned so much from turning to people like Colin Dillingham and the Edwards and the Bowers and Ryan Burnett and stuff during the course of the big year. This is another one more in the energy realm. You know, follow your hunches and be open to serendipity and synchronicity. Interestingly, the day had this occasion where I needed to take my son to the orthodontist in Reno, and I got this feeling, I should get in touch with Christy Jameson. And I sent her this text the day before, like, you know, it's that time of the year, there could be Harris sparrows, there could be like a red-naped sapsucker or something around your house. So could you like keep your eye open? The very next morning, right as we're leaving town to go to the orthodontist, she texted me, "You're not gonna believe this. There's a Harris sparrow at my feeder at my house, which is on the way to Reno." So we were able to see that Harris sparrow, Drew, and make it to the orthodontist on time. That was one of the easier birds, but and Christy's still thinking, how the heck did you like, no, that was, I mean, it was mainly from studying eBird and kind of seeing what I didn't have yet and stuff. And then I would say, this is, if you enter a big year, I think it's good to try to commit. I mean, life can happen, but to try to commit to it and take it all the way to the finish. One really good thing that can help us take it to the finish line, are that there's 3 Christmas bird counts in Plumas County. So you're kind of running out of fuel, and then and you're doing most of the birding on your own or occasionally with other people. Then these 3 bird counts, one in Sierra Valley, one right here in American Valley, and then one at Lake Almanor, provide like a great boost of camaraderie, and also a lot of eyes, a lot of good birders on the ground at the same time. So there's almost always rarities found, a lot of interesting sightings. Like we found some white-throated sparrow in Quincy. There was a short-eared owl at Lake Almanor. What was it? Sierra Valley, we had a couple good ones too, but I wasn't one of them. There was only death out on, it was so cold. It was so cold I had the Marble Hot Spring. Yeah. Yeah, great, yeah. Yeah. There's always some good stuff that turns up on the Christmas bird counts. Here's that Harris sparrow that Christy Jameson so generously found and let me know about, and Colin, and I think maybe Colin and I were the only 2. The Harris sparrows are pretty infamous for leaving quick. They only hang out for a little bit and then they leave, unlike a lot of sparrows that hang out. So I think it was gone the next day. So got lucky on that one. Some of the lessons learned, some of this is repeating from the first part, but rather than the big year for me, rather than primarily being about competition, ended up really being an immersive, rapid learning opportunity. I've been away from serious birding for a long time. Kind of like just like taking a trip to Mexico if you're working on Spanish, where you totally immerse yourself in the thing you're learning about. And in my case, it was birds. But also the geography of the Feather River watershed in Plumas County. It really gets you around. If you're trying to get all the species, you have to get to all the places where the species occur. So you really get around and see the entire county. Good chance to contribute the knowledge and the data via eBird and via iNaturalist, via the Christmas bird counts. It's a great citizen science opportunity. It allowed me to reconnect with friends, some new friends, made some new friends, reconnected with some old friends. I think it's just that thing that a lot of us already know. If you pursue a passion area, you tend to meet others that have that same passion, share that same passion. So it's a great way to connect with like-minded folks. Talked about the giving and receiving of advice and knowledge. Chance to see my kids see me doing something I loved in real time. I did speak about this. The hearing loss was hard for me at times. There were at times I was actually emotional, like sitting, looking at a brown creeper and just not being able to hear it. A bird I'd heard my whole life. I was suspected after the first few months that my hearing had gone. I knew it had gone down just from conversations and stuff, but like Kelby Gardner's out there getting a brown creeper like every single time he goes birding. And I'm just not hearing them, they're up in the trees and usually and stuff. So that was hard. And then I eventually treated it as a practice in presence and in the stuff that comes up. Your anxieties come up wherever you go, there you are. And the way we do anything is the way we do everything, including birding, including a thing you really love. You take a lot of your neuroses and shadow and anxieties into that. So I was doing it so much. I was doing it almost every day. So it was a good chance to practice in nature. It gets you out in nature. Couple inspirations in closing. One, I have derived a lot of inspiration and hope from, and I don't know if you're watching Mary. I actually don't know Mary Cronin, but I have noted this woman who lives on School Street in Greenville, kind of at ground zero in Greenville. She enters eBird data every day from her house, I presume from her house on School Street in Greenville. And it's very inspiring to me. It's often just a couple birds. It'll be like a dark-eyed junco and a Steller's jay, sometimes a spotted towhee. But the mere fact that she's there in burned over Greenville, observing birds, entering birds, is very inspiring to me. It's very hopeful. So even though I don't know her, she inspires me. And even though her list is 3 species, it inspires me. So the last thing is, and I think I talked to Lucinda about this, but I also derive some inspiration and hope from bird migration. I happened to be out birding. I was looking for this. I was trying to re-find a gray vireo I had found along Spanish Creek by Gansner Park, which is the first. Well, interestingly, it didn't get officially recorded. It's the only bird on my list that didn't officially get approved on. One of the reviewers approved it and Colin didn't approve. No, mainly because he's gone to, anytime there's a first ever record, he wants a photo or auditory recording, which I think is actually a good idea. But this is a species I know very well from Arizona when I was at graduate school, the gray vireo. But anyway, I was out looking for this gray vireo, which I know was a gray vireo, even though it's not official. And that doesn't bother me, Dan. No. But I was out there and it was kind of in mid-morning. It was an overcast day. And I heard some cranes fire up, which is not unusual for the bike path along Gansner Park. And I heard them, and it was 2 adults and a young one that was a little bit smaller than the adults. And pretty soon they're all calling loudly, and I hear over by FRC another couple calling. And then I hear over further by the Bresciani Morrison Ranch some more calling. And I look up and there's a couple more higher up in the air. And what I witnessed over the course of about 10 minutes was all these pairs, and often in 3s, usually sandhill cranes, even though they have more than one colt, usually only one survives. So they often migrate out in 3s. But over the course of about 10 minutes, they're gathered about 20 sandhill cranes, and they're all calling and they're all circling up, and they all flew southwest out of the valley. And I think it was all the sandhill cranes in American Valley had all come together and circled out, and it was a beautiful moment. One, because the cranes give me a lot of inspiration, migration in general. You know, in our changing world that faces climate change, mega fires, you know, potential nuclear war. It's by their very being, by their very will to migrate, even though they're not, I don't think they're taking, you know, they're not taking in the stresses as we humans are, but just that they're going to the winter grounds again, in the Central Valley and the Delta. The greater sandhill cranes are going there again. I think it's by nature hopeful, you know, that they're leaving with the anticipation that it's going to be there again. Their winter grounds are going to be there. And that's inspiring to me. And I got a shot of them as they were headed out. Thank you. Thought I could do it without crying. I almost did. But thank you for your attention on, you know, on such a bad weather night and such a late, long presentation. But I was wondering, I would take some questions now if anyone has any. I guess, how do I do the online ones?
I just put into the chat, please feel free to put
Okay.
questions.
Cool.
So if
Well, this isn't a question, but your story makes it clear why sandhill cranes have such loud trumpeting voices. So they can
Yeah.
find one another and migrate.
Yeah. They're like calling. It was so, I mean, the thing, oh, I forgot. Yeah. I mean, I draw hope from the fact that they're hopeful in their migration. Also, just by I drew a lot of hope from that too, just from, I wouldn't have seen it if I wasn't out there. You know, the big year in itself got me outside. I had been living a very report writing inside, building to building, occasionally getting out life. And I was really grateful that I was out there to see that. That has been happening year after year after year in American Valley for actually millions of years. The sandhill cranes are believed to be one of our oldest bird species based on the fossil record, a couple million years old, at least as a species. And yeah, and I saw it because I was out there and I was grateful for that. And there's so many things, you know, it doesn't have to be a birding practice, just getting out in nature as a nature practice. You witness things that you just wouldn't otherwise witness if you're on a screen all day, or if you're in the busyness of life, office to office, computer to computer. So yeah, amen to that. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions? All right. Well, thank you everybody so much. Thanks, Jeff, for coming. Yeah. Oh, Emma, sorry.
Do you have a favorite bird?
Oh, thank.
Well, that's the hardest question.
Yeah, I do. I have kind of, I have a totem bird that really encourages me. Seems often when I'm needing courage, Canada geese, surprisingly, even when I proposed to your mom, I was about to get cold feet and a flock of Canada geese flew over and I did the deed. So yes, Canada geese. I like green kingfishers are a species that I've always loved. That's in Arizona. Yeah. See you guys. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you. So I like swans are up there too, but Canada geese and the green kingfisher I think stand out. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you for coming and thank you for humoring my long-windedness and yeah. And who knows, I may write about this. There's so much it's hard to capture in a presentation or two, you know, but I may write about it and put it out in other forms, but yeah, really meaningful. I'm not doing a big year this year, despite what some of you might think. I've really shifted out of it. You'll see on eBird. All right, thank you.
That's our bedtime.
Shall I?
Would you guys like-
I would love a copy of our Christmas bird count. I know you've been
Oh,
really
yeah,
busy
yeah.
getting this
Oh,
right. But you know, last weekend I did the backyard bird count, so now I'm on eBird. So if you want to just do it that way, just, yeah.
Yeah.
And
good
we
stuff.
just did little snippets of time, but
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, eBird. I think you'll love it. All right, I'm writing it on my list.
thank you.
Maybe we should do like an introduction to eBird speaker program, like a workshop kind
Yeah,
of thing. Wouldn't
I
that be fun?
I
I've been
think
thinking about that for a
That'd be a
while.
really good citizen
I think
science
that would
kind
be
of,
fun.
All right, the CBC.
Thanks.
You know what, one
Just
challenge I
figured
had
out like new things this year.
when we met at the wine bar.
Yeah, it's fun. I plan on.
I handed the data sheet to Darla.
Uh-huh.
and
I
she
like
took it. I thought she was
going
gonna like
places
make a
and then
copy
like
of it or
changing
something.
my explore
So she
tab
has
on
it, so
my
that's
phone,
been,
like
Oh,
showing
I
me
had like
what's in the
almost got it
area,
to you.
and
and
like,
then-
wait, we gotta
and
divert
then
our route
then
to
I-
the direction.
then
There's
I
a
was
road
like,
over
multiple
here.
steps
We're like making the whole road trip based
But
on.
If you can do it on eBird, that works.
Why are we
Yeah.
doing this? It's just-
I did have an
It's
eBird,
gonna be worth
but I don't know that's.
Yeah.
She had the data sheet.
it. Okay.
I did an eBird based on my recollection.
Oh, but
it would be
yeah,
good